Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, and welcome to Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm Marie Stella, your host from Melbourne, Australia. Let's start the show. Welcome back to Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast. Today we're speaking to artist and attorney Stephanie Drawdy, who will be helping us wrap our heads around the enigma that is AI and discovering just how much of an assistance it can be in our artistic pursuits. Through her writing projects and podcast Welfare of Arts and Law, Stephanie sheds light on all kinds of arts-related issues from copyright to cultural and social matters. But aside from that, she also has ongoing painting series titled Elicit Justice, where she focuses on art restitution and human rights. Hi, Stephanie. How are you doing today?
Hi, Marie. I'm doing well. How are you?
Fine, thank you. So I'm really curious to know, and I'm sure our audience is as well, what do you hope to achieve with your writing projects, podcast, and art?
I think the main focus that has evolved for me is bringing people to a point where they're open to talking about justice. Because whenever I ask someone that on the podcast, more times than not, they are put off by it. And just in daily interactions, if it ever comes up, it's always something that is a topic too big to even approach. And I'm trying to help break it down into bite-sized pieces with the paintings that you mentioned. That series, I started it to focus on human rights issues, and then it grew into art restitution issues that I was learning about that were very frustrating to me. And I saw a lot of injustice. And a lot of times it's easier to define justice in terms of injustice. But just having that dialogue, I think, helps.
That sounds like a great purpose to have for art. And you're right, it's such a big topic that a lot of people are afraid to talk about because they're probably afraid to be on the wrong side of things or afraid to have a strong opinion on something. So it's great that you're trying to normalize that. Now, before we get started on the interview today, we'd love to get to know you better. So this is Have You Met Stephanie? My first question for you is, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Well, we've already talked about painting and podcasting, lawyering. My entire art practice, I look at my life as kind of like as my art practice with these different prongs. And it is all consuming, but it's all things I love. So it kind of, if I'm not researching for a project, I'm doing the project. Yeah. Which, the research is part of the process.
Yeah, that's amazing that you managed to turn what is like a pastime or like a hobby or an interest into something that's so tangible and such like a real project, which that just amazes me. Is there anything else that what other time do you have?
Well, I do a lot of yoga.
Oh, wow.
That helps keep me sane.
Yeah, I might have to start trying that. Maybe that is the key. All of these people who are doing such great big things are doing yoga. I might be missing out here. And do you read in your spare time?
Yeah, I read a lot for like the case law that I write about, and also any kind of background research when I'm interviewing someone. Yeah, but also just historical fiction is something I'm very interested in. And so I'm trying to bring that along also in my own practice. But to do that, I always try to keep current on different authors that might feed that.
That's really interesting. Are there any historical fiction books that you'd recommend?
Yeah, well, actually, I was going to recommend one that's coming out in January as it actually segues with you had asked about my role models. And so one of the big groups of role models I have are women authors who go out of their way to highlight the stories of women who have been discarded in history. And so there are two authors, Dr. Joanna Sliwa and Dr. Elizabeth White, and they co-authored a book, The Counterfeit Countess. So it's coming out in January, and I've got an advance copy. And so I won't spoil it for anyone, but suffice it to say, in a quick soundbite, that it is a Polish Jewish woman who risks her life and goes underground, so to speak, counterfeiting herself as a countess of Aryan descent. And she goes into the Majdanek concentration camp and saves thousands of Polish individuals who would have died otherwise. And the interesting, more compelling than even that, is that she was risking her life every time she went into this camp. It was one of the more notorious extermination camps. And had she been caught for who she really was, she would have been interned there as well. So it's a very compelling story. And those two women have brought it to life 80 years after the fact. And so I find that to be something very admirable.
Yeah, that is incredible. And it sounds like I've got to get my hands on a copy as well. Where can you find this?
Well, so the link, when I interview them, I will post the link on my podcast episode for where it can be located. Since I received an advance copy, I'm not exactly sure where, but I know that if you go to actually Joanna Sliwa, Sliwa, her website, I'm sure there must be a link.
Amazing. I'm gonna definitely keep tabs on it.
Yes.
And as for films, do you like watching films about historical fiction as well?
I do actually. So there is one that I think it's perhaps loosely fits in as historical fiction, but I don't know if you notice the theme, but this film I'm about to tell you about is also set in World War II, and it's dealing with occupied France. It's called All the Light We Cannot See. Have you seen that?
No, I've not.
Well, it's based on a book by Anthony Doerr, and it has, if you'd like for me to give you a broad brushstroke of it, the cast of characters includes a girl who, as her younger self, had lost her vision. And now fast forward, and she's in occupied France. Her father and she escape to or flee rather, from Paris because when the Nazis take over, and they go to live with her reclusive uncle. And while there, events unfold that bring her path into that of a Hitler Youth Academy individual who has this compelling point that he is using technology against his will, almost, it seems, but the Nazis have forced him as well to use technology in a subversive way. And so I thought that fit really well with perhaps some of the other topics we're going to discuss today. And I don't want to give too much away, but highly recommended. I haven't read the book yet, but the film is stellar.
Yeah, 100%. It sounds like something I've got to add to my watch list as well. I'm going to France in 2025, and I really want to see the lost cities that were burned in the World War. So that's something that I'm really interested in as well. So that sounds amazing. Thank you for the recommendation.
Absolutely.
Now, as for role models, like we've discussed a little bit prior.
Yeah.
What are some specific role models you have either in your professional or personal life?
You know, painters are often the ones that come to mind initially for me. And what I thought was kind of interesting when I was thinking about this is that many of the role models that came to mind were men. And that speaks so much of how our historical truth has been, that it has buried the stories of women painters or women artists, for that matter, across the board. And so I was initially, as a young painter, very interested in the work of artists like John Singer Sargent and Marc Chagall. And then as I started to dig deeper, there were other female painters that came up. And it's one that I hone in on. And I actually, I find this so interesting that Cecilia Bowes, she is a painter who, self-made woman, and had no artistic bent in her family. It was her path that she forged herself. But she's described as the female equivalent of John Singer Sargent. And I just think that's interesting that even when she's being described in history, even for that one page she gets
compared to
yes.
a man.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
that says it all, I think.
Exactly. That happens so much. And even now, like even with pop culture, that happens. I mean, Taylor Swift gets compared to the Beatles a lot, and we don't even realize it, you know?
Yeah. So we're so desensitized to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I feel like we got to know you a bit better. Now we're moving on to the interview section. And my first question for you is something that we like to ask all of our guests. This can differ from person to person, I feel like. So we'd love to get your opinion. How would you define personal development?
Yeah. So I think about this a lot, and I just don't even realize it because I'm constantly listening to different or reading about different ways that the successful person is organizing their life so that they can pursue to the maximum whatever they care about. So for me, I think personal development involves a lot of exploration to find what fits for you. And trying one thing or another. And it may change from season to season. It often does. And being okay with making those subtle pivots so that you can meet your own personal needs and those are of the needs of those around you.
Yeah, for sure. And what do you think are the main challenges when it comes to pursuing that personal development?
I think it's a point that I find is so important is practicing empathy with other people. And I think that's the biggest challenge is having your own personal development at your core while also maintaining empathy for and creating space for those that you might encounter that, you know, it may not be convenient to help them, you know, in a certain instance. And it might get in the way of your personal development, but that is still part of your personal development, having that full approach to being there for others, but also knowing your own boundaries.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd say that regression is probably part of development as well, because you learn lessons after having, perceived regression, I guess, because some people would think it's regression, but it's, you know, it's not. It's part of the journey. So that would be development. And so how would you define art, and how do you think it contributes to our personal growth?
Well, I think I'll answer the last question first. I think art is key to understanding our inner selves. And so for me, and I think I touched on this at the very beginning, I look at art as my whole experience. And so art, many people see art as just a more narrow definition, but I've grown over the years to see it as anything creative, whether it's gardening or, you know, many people don't see the practice of law as a creative endeavor, but I think it is, and it can be.
It completely is. A lot of things are art. I completely agree with you there. I feel like I was writing my thesis like at the start of the year, and I was thinking like writing this is art. It is absolutely an art, because I was reading all of these like previous students and their works and their thesis.
Right.
And I was thinking like the way they structure it, everything from the way they word it in a very like scholarly academic way, but still with some flair, and the way they structure it and the way they like provide visual aids along with the words and explanation. All of that is art.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I can absolutely see practicing law as a form of art. It's absolutely a form of art. And it takes creativity to solve and figure out how to get around cases. Absolutely. I agree with you there. So how do you think art and AI are connected?
Well, in many ways, many of which so far have gone badly. I've written a lot on and presented courses on AI and all the lawsuits that have been trickling down, especially in the United States where I am. And so, unfortunately, there are two sides to the coin. There are these AI generative tools require lots of data in order to function, and they have been pulling it from, not everyone, but many have been pulling them in unethical ways. I would highlight that there are entities like Adobe Firefly that have ethically sourced their data, and so kudos to them, but many of them do not. And so there are many creatives who don't get credit, don't get compensation, and they're up in arms about it. And they want to have the right to consent. And so that has fueled this fire of lawsuits. And so that's one way it touches. And then another way is the output. Currently, at least in the States, there is no copyright, or there is an evolving conversation about whether outputs from generative AI should have copyright protection. And I'll give one example that I think is very, it muddies the waters a bit. There is a gentleman, Dr. Stephen Toller, and he has filed a suit against the U.S. Copyright Office that's now on appeal because he created an AI tool himself. And then the output, he wanted copyright protection for it. And there's a lot of nuanced detail to that. But just to give the short version, he was denied copyright protection. And now he's trying to make a point about that. And I think if there's any individual who has a right to claim protection as a work for hire or what have you, it would be someone like him who has created the machine himself, and the output that's come out of it just seems directly linked to him. So talk about a creative endeavor on many levels.
Yeah, that's insane. And you did mention that a lot of AI tools don't source data ethically. So what are some of the ethical ones, and how do we identify which have gathered data ethically?
Well, so there is an index that was created, the Transparency Index, and you can just put that in as a search term and it should come up. But it goes through all the different AI developers and it rates them on many different points, but one of them deals directly with data sets and how they've been dealing with that. And almost all of them that were scored badly. But that one I did mention, Adobe and its Firefly generative tool, it's still emerging, and that's a point I would make about using AI tools. The Adobe Firefly is an example of one where they are using licensed material they own, and they also, I believe, are giving a offering if for some reason something did go wrong. Many of these AI developers are offering indemnification, so that if you're sued, that you'll be covered.
Yeah.
But that opens a whole host of issues that you may not want to deal with. And if you're not monetizing your output, it may not matter if it's just for your personal use or you're wanting to post it online, depending on what it is. But one of the lawsuits deals with music labels.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that's very interesting, because it's harder to delineate an image and say, well, perhaps this image does or doesn't look like your artwork that was fed into this AI tool. But with words, the words are the words. And if they're all in the same cadence and order, then how hard is it for you to defend yourself? So like one example that they put in a complaint filed in that lawsuit is write a book or a short story in the style of Louis Armstrong.
Mm-hmm.
And the output that they put in the complaint as proof was the exact lyrics from a Louis Armstrong song. So there it seems very hard to defend yourself that you didn't use and infringe.
Sure. And on the other hand, what are some ways in which AI can help with our artistic pursuit and vice versa? I mean, if there are all these issues with ethical data sourcing and, them just kind of ripping off other artists, is it really a worthy pursuit?
Good question. And I just heard someone the other day asking, why does an AI tool need to make art? Why is that? Why? And so there are many people asking that. But on the flip side, personally, I have made for my podcast music videos.
Mm-hmm.
And I've used an AI tool, Kyber, for that. And I think that it's a good example. That's actually a very good example for showing how to use a tool in a way that does or doesn't work. Because when I first used it, I just wanted to see what it would do with word prompts. And it was very unimpressive. But when I put the music in that I planned to use, it really was quite a lovely 30 seconds of output. And, you had to play with it a lot, but with the prompts that you did put in, and there was a lot of things in the style of, but I tried to use artists that were in the public domain.
Mm-hmm. And what advice would you have for writing prompts and how to use them effectively?
Yeah, it's an experimental process. And so it really does depend on which AI tool you're using and what you're going for. But I would say, going back to my earlier point, that if you are going to use a tool, I find that, at least the way they are right now, a lot of the output is very unimpressive. At least as an artist looking at trying to, like, why would I use this? Because it's taking me so long to try to figure out how to get this AI tool to generate something I want. And I could just go to my easel and do it myself. But it's still good to see and to understand what it is. So experimentation, and also the tools are, I imagine, going to only improve from here. But using your own art, like Chris Castanova is another example of an artist who was denied copyright for their output. But on their second try, they used their own drawing to put in, and I believe that might still be pending, whether or not they're going to receive copyright protection. But it's an example of using your own art to not only perhaps find an image that more suits you, but also an image that might be more compelling for copyright protection, at least in America.
And from where we're sitting at the moment, where do you see the future of AI and art being? And on the other hand, what would you hope the future would be?
Well, I would hope that the infringement that has been rampant would be handled in an ethical way and not continue. That would be the main hope. And then the other is, so many people have described or tried to analogize generative AI to photography, for example. And there are many reasons why that's not a great analogy, but for limited purposes, let's say it is. And just the same way photography was very much initially a big threat to artists, eventually people saw it as another tool to use. And now many artists, at least painters, will use a photograph to paint from or as part of their process. So I believe it could just be another tool that we use and use ethically.
Yeah, that's great. And so my last question for you is, in what ways do you think art and AI can facilitate our personal growth and understanding of ourselves?
Yeah. I'll use a couple examples. One is a gentleman who is a California artist who I interviewed, and Ben Kinmont, he started his business as an antiquarian bookseller as an art project. And so using art in that big scheme way to understand who you are. And then another gentleman, an attorney and an artist who I interviewed, Sergio Sarmiento, he went to law school as an art project. So using these big scheme ways of looking at art and then incorporating on top of it this technological advancement.
Yeah.
Kind of just learning how to weave it in for yourself. It goes back to that personal development concept that it really is just so it's a couture experience that you have to hone for yourself.
Yeah. First of all, I must say that going to law school as an art project is the most artist thing I've ever heard. And it's also like the intellect you've got to have. So go to law school for an arts project and not for like dedicating your life to law like most people do. It's just incredible to me. Artists will never cease to just astounds me. And secondly, I was going to say that it sounds like weaving AI into your art does open your eyes a little bit more, and it forces you to step out of your comfort zone because this is a new thing.
Yes.
So that sounds like that will help with, developing some of your skills and being a bit more open-minded as well. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And now we're moving on to the practice/habit section. My first question for you is, what is a practice that you do to improve your skills or creativity when it comes to using AI for your artistic pursuits?
I often have looked at, say, ChatGPT for research. If I'm in the middle of writing something and I just want to understand the nuance of something. And I often will double check it. Mm-hmm. There are so many, just as an aside note. Yeah. I mean, I just saw the other day where there was someone else, another attorney, who had submitted a brief to the court and had not checked the case cites, and it was generated by AI. Such a crazy concept that you would do that. So always check your, large language models to make sure they know what they're talking about. But it can be interesting. Or, I have friends who use it to jumpstart them on their creative writing. And I've actually tried that a couple of times, just wanting to see, like, I have a scene in mind and how would the AI tool do it. And I found that it was actually, and I did it a couple of times, and I varied the scene and the characters and what was going on. And it often seemed very repetitive. So that, perhaps will improve. But examples like that, I think, are helpful. And, it's not something that's supposed to be your writing. It's just another way to warm the flame that your creative energy might need from time to time.
Yeah, for sure. And you might go into that, and get all these repetitiveness and come out being like, oh, maybe it's better that I actually do my own art and think of, like, what I think my own brain just generates stuff that's a bit less repetitive and a bit more original. So it does give you a bit of like a feeling of like, oh, I'm worthy of doing art. Like, it gives you that confirmation. Like, okay, I'm not just like everyone else.
And also that humans might not be usurped by robots anytime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And so those seem like a few challenges in doing that habit. But I'm curious to know, what are 3 good things about doing this?
Well, so I actually get very excited about this because there are several projects that I would point to here. And big picture, art authentication is an issue in many respects. And so there are ways to use AI generative tools to help art authenticators have not like it will be a be all end all, but another tool to use in the art authentication process. A side note on that, which I found interesting, is there's a company out of Switzerland, Art Recognition, and they've issued an opinion that a certain Raphael, Madonna, and Child, the child is believed to be a Raphael. And there was an AI tool that said, I think like 96% positive this Raphael child in the picture is genuine. And Art Recognition came in and said, 85% sure it's not. So still not going to have complete confirmation, but it's interesting. And, and sometimes they do agree. And so again, it goes back to the tool you're using, how the data sets are curated, and as the tools improve, perhaps that kind of disparity won't happen. But 2 more projects or examples of projects that I would mention are in the Rijksmuseum. There was a big endeavor for several years to take a Rembrandt painting, The Night Watch, massive painting. I think it's like 12 foot by 14 foot, but it had been cut down after it had been installed. There are many rumors about why it was cut down, but several pieces from all sides are missing. And they wanted to reassemble it with its missing parts. So they used 3 different AI tools and created in the style of the Rembrandt, based on a Rembrandt, a copy that another artist did before it was cut down. So that's very exciting because it shows that you can take art that might be lost and bring it back into the public's eye in the manner in which the artist originally intended it.
That's amazing.
Isn't it so compelling?
Yeah, absolutely. And everything that you've told me about AI, well, like, I had this very vague perception of AI. I've only really tried using ChatGPT, right? I don't know what else is there in AI. I feel like the public's opinion right now is like, it's this giant monster that's going to take over the world. But in reality, it really sounds like, you have a toolbox, and inside are like a bunch of tools. It's just a new tool that's going to be included in the toolbox.
Yes.
And that's going to be available now for your use when at your disposal anytime you want to test it out. And it might not work all the time for like different things. It might be better for certain things, but yeah, so it doesn't sound that daunting after all.
Yeah,
So,
I had there was a conversation I heard on a podcast with a couple of painters talking about how will AI impact painters, and so I found that particular conversation especially interesting. And some of the points that they were making were that the process of painting is never going to be threatened by AI, because you're never going to have that same feeling that if you're an oil painter like I am, you hear often from oil painters that it's that feeling of the paint, mixing it and applying it. And that is what's addictive. And that's never going to go away. The question they did raise was whether collectors and gallerists might find it easier to pass off or maybe they won't pass it off, but telling the buying audience, this is AI generated, and you no longer need these certain artists, like illustrators. They were saying they think that illustrators might bear a bigger burden under AI, that they might be replaced. But I think time will tell. But I think when it all shakes out, there's still going to be a market for people who want a unique piece of art.
Yeah, for sure. It's that human touch that you can't really use AI to achieve. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. That was really insightful. Now we're moving on to the open mic section, and this is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about. And it doesn't have to be related to the topic, but I have a feeling that it will. So the floor is yours. Take it away.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm sure that I will be segueing from some of the topics we covered for sure. The big picture that I started off with about justice and how do you define justice? Like, I guess I would just reiterate that I would love to hear from others how they view justice. I mean, I started an the painting Elicit Justice series with that goal in mind of having people interact with the art and then share their definitions. And so just carrying that forward, I would love to hear more about that. And, the series of paintings, I'd mentioned some of the points, but like one of them is focuses on Billie Holiday, a jazz singer who faced a lot of ridicule for a certain song that she wanted to record, and it's called Strange Fruit. She wanted to highlight it. This is in the 1930s United States, and she wanted to highlight the horrific lynchings that were going on in the South, and it was not popular. She did it anyway. Perhaps I should list her as another role model, because I find that so admirable that you stand up in the face of others who are your peers and it's not popular, but highlighting a problem that you see, an injustice that you want changed. Yeah. And so, just keeping that fire going with these kinds of paintings and different kinds of work, like the podcast does it. I'm working on a book that highlights different interviews from the podcast that would bring that home more, hopefully. And those are just different ways. I feel like I'm going at the issue in as many different angles as possible and seeing what develops.
Yeah, for sure. And moving forward, are there any other art projects or personal projects that you are hoping to complete or get started on in this realm of the art restoration and art restitution. My bad, my apologies. Art restitution and art related issues.
Well, I am working on a historical fiction novel that will weave some of this into it, and I actually took solace from several authors, including the author who wrote All the Light You Cannot See, because it took 10 years for that book to be written. And so that's the journey I'm on right now. It's a project I have going in on the sidelines, but I'm in it for the long haul.
That's amazing. Your art project sounds so compelling, and there's so many things that you're pursuing. There's so many projects you're pursuing. Are there any dream art projects that you see yourself pursuing in the future but can't really touch on right now?
Well, what I'm working with some other artists who are also attorneys right now. And one thing that we were trying to do is creating group shows of artist attorneys. And so if there are any listeners who happen to be practicing law and practicing art in any capacity, we'd love to hear from you. You can find me on LinkedIn, because I feel like it's a collective that I have seen the need for, because years ago I'd written an article about my experience as being an artist and an attorney, and I heard from so many people, whether it was they were thinking of going to law school but they weren't sure if they could do both, practice law or study law and be a creative, and or people that had already gone to law school and they were finding themselves in this place where they didn't know how they could fit their two halves of themselves together. And I was still figuring that out myself. I still am. But I realized there was a whole community of these individuals who were questioning whether they could be creative and also pursue something like the law. And I find that there are more of those individuals every time I turn around. So bringing them all together, showing their art, I think that would be a beautiful synergy.
Yeah, that is amazing. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for joining us today and sharing all about your personal projects and your opinions on art and AI. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Well, I have a link tree that has all of the links to it, but I'm on Instagram as Drawdy Esq. I'm on LinkedIn with my name. There's the Warfare of Art and Law website, Stephanie Drawdy Fine Art, any of those places, and there should be links within that to link to the other sites.
All right, amazing. We'll link those in our show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope you learned something about AI and how it correlates to art, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pe.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.